Hi everybody, Drazule here, and as Civilization 6 was recently announced, I've decided that I'll take it upon myself to break down the trailer, and, well, the trailer isn't too much. I'm going to go through the trailer a little bit, and approach the released screenshots and all of the media we know to kind of have a breakdown release of what this game is actually going to be like. So, look at the trailer. It's mostly just map stuff and some cool things. It's what you'd expect out of a Civilization trailer, to be perfectly honest. Talking about history and whatnot, and pretty much the creation of Civilization. But what is more interesting is the screenshots that they've released, as the actual trailer itself doesn't really reveal too much, but we actually know quite a bit about this game if you do a little bit of digging. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to show us our first screenshot here, which is of a Egyptian city, as it seems to be. We have a nice landscape, and as you can see, immediately off the bat, the game looks a lot more stylized. It's a lot more, I don't want to say cartoony, but it does only have like a more like painterly feel to it. The model is a lot larger, a lot more stylized, a lot more recognizable, which is obviously an attempt to make things, well, more recognizable in the game. That, in a Civ 5, what you'd realize is that you'd probably be paying more attention to the UI elements and the unit flags than actually looking at the units themselves. And I have a feeling like part of this is because they want to make things more recognizable for the units themselves instead of making them recognizable from the UI descriptions. So first thing I'm going to point out is just the city right in the beginning here. And that is our Egyptian city. It could be a sort of African city tile set. I'm not super sure right now, but you can see it's got a whole bunch of those kind of square, tall buildings, some fun blue decoration, and the city itself doesn't really seem to display the colors of the Civ, but it's pretty much guaranteed to be Egypt, and I'll bring a couple of those reasons why later, mainly being the pyramids are here, and it's, they have the purple and yellow color scheme, so either they're the Lakers, or they're Egypt again. Which would mean that this is probably following the sort of African city tile set, because if you go and look up here now, there's another city, and if we kind of zoom and enhance a little bit, you can see that they are very different city sets. The one I'm referring to is the Egyptian one, has the kind of white, kind of sandstone buildings, shallow roofs, and kind of that large building in the center, which is highly decorated, while the other one looks more like a dreary kind of medieval village. You know, they got kind of like longer houses with sort of thatch roofs, wooden buildings, you know, things you would find in Europe as opposed to in, say, Egypt or North Africa, which you wouldn't really find too much in the way of wood. So this leads me to believe that, well, I mean, it's very evident, and in fact confirmed, that these cities do actually have different tile sets, and they look different just like they were in Civ 5. But I believe that the Civ up there is following the European tile set, and that it might be Portugal. That those are the colors of Portugal in Civ 5, and considering that this is clearly Egypt with the same colors, could be there, so maybe Portugal's confirmed, or maybe that's just simply the colors they have for the release screenshots. Everything in here is completely open to change, I'd imagine. So let's go move ahead. And one of my favorite things that we have going on now is kind of coasts and cliffs that you'll see. They look in the top right corner here. We have a coastline that looks like something you could land on, you can embark off of, but then to the left here, you have, looks like a cliff along the coastline, which I think is great because coasts were always really vulnerable in Civ 5. You could settle a city there, and you pretty much had to find like a bay to get it in so it couldn't be attacked from all angles. But this way, it's more interesting that if you find kind of like the one tile along the coast and the rest of its cliffs, you can actually kind of make a choke point to control all entrance onto land for a certain period of, or a certain area of land there. Which I'm looking forward to, actually. That'd be really interesting to see how that works, and if that affects anything in gameplay. But we go on to the next slide here. We got farms. Well, like I said, they're varied, and they seem to connect up one with one another, that we have about 5 tiles of farms in this screenshot. And I imagine, I haven't actually heard anything about hex tiles in this one. Everything in here about lines up for a hex tile, like it did in Civ 5. And you see that they blend between the hex tiles, which if you look back at the original screenshot here, you'll see that they blend together. They don't look like 6 different tiles, which might kind of indicate that these guys are actually kind of blending together, which is really fun. But enough about farms. That now we have this gold tile here. This tile is a mystery to me, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, that there are actually many variations, and I'll talk about that later. But I'm not really sure what it's there for. That it could be a sort of culture area, that you got some sort of like shrine or like a legal house or something. But it's weird that it's either like a culture or faith thing, and I can't figure it out. And I may have actually read a reference to it, but I know that they are color coding things. That the blue one is science, the red ones are military. I don't know what these gold ones are for, and I'll bring them up later, but it's weird because they have a lot of variations and stuff in them. But here we have what looks to be some sort of trade outpost, I'd say. You got a bunch of buildings, kind of a marketplace. Maybe this is a sort of tile that builds gold. What I actually forgot to mention, actually, is that city buildings and districts, that may have been more important to bring up earlier. And how that works is, while I'm sure you still build buildings within the cities themselves, you actually kind of build district tiles that are dependent on the population of the city. So that there's the city core, city center, which is actually the control of the city. But if somebody is invading, say, your farms, if you have military production out near the back, you can be building military like all in the back of the territory and kind of fight like in the outskirt, like suburb kind of like reaches of like the borders of one city, which I think is really interesting. It's kind of very much in a way of Endless Legends, that you kind of expand your cities outward. That even though in Civ 5 they visually expanded past the original tile, they're always just one tile cities, but now you could probably have sprawling metropolises. So I think it's some sort of like a trading post, something to generate gold for your empire. So next to it we have a mine of sorts. Not much really to it, to be perfectly frank. It's simple mine, but worth pointing out that, mines are also around. But what I don't know is, are mines tile improvements or are mines districts, and is there a difference between those two? And obviously, so that controls that metal resource there, but I don't really know if that's actually considered part of the city or simply part of the environment that's improved. Now up here we have the blue science tile. This one I know for a fact is blue. The blue tiles are for science. And look at it, it's just kind of got a whole bunch of buildings, kind of a university type thing. I imagine that's sort of where you build your libraries and your universities and whatnot. Not much to cover there, really. But here is really interesting that we have our units. The military, and like I was saying before, that this is Egypt, very obviously. They must be using the sort of African unit set too, because if you realize, they're both black. Or African, or, however you prefer to refer to this. But if you compare their skin tones, they're using that, which was actually a really popular mod in Civ 5, or in the base game for Civ 5. Simply, like, the swordsman units were all kind of like a Romanesque swordsman. The archers were all white. But this way, they actually have ethnic-looking units, which is confirmed to be around, that, depending on what kind of continental set you're based off of, you'll have a little bit different units, which I think is really fun. That it really makes the civs feel a little more unique, I'd say. So up here we got the Great Lighthouse, it seems to be, right off the coast. I mean, it looks great. They're definitely much more visible than Civ 5. And right next to it, we got what looks to be some triremes over some fish. They don't look like fishing boats. They look like they're warships of some sorts, but notice they're in twos, which in Civ 5, all boats were in ones. So it's really interesting to see that now they're kind of expanding that out, and that the fish tiles are there. Now, up here, we have pigs, it looks like. Which is fun. Maybe truffles are back, maybe a luxury resource, just a food source. And down here we got the just kind of like a pine tree forest. But up in the forest, up in the corner here, there's like a village. Now that village isn't in a territory, and that's curious to say the least. What does that really mean? That if your borders go within it, is it like a free tile? Is that something you can kind of conquer? Is it considered kind of like a city-state, or like a ruin where you find it and increases the population of your city? I don't know. I haven't really seen any reference to what this guy back here in that corner is, so I'm really interested to see where that goes. So we have a marsh tile here, and just more terrain, I guess, so marshes are back, not too much to be worried about. But here we got some, like, grassy reeds. I don't know what's up with that, really. Like, what does that denote, really? Is that just, like, maybe like a cover thing? Like, it doesn't look like there's any sort of crop in there or anything. It's just kind of grassy reeds, so if anybody has any ideas what that might be, let me know. And last thing I'd like to point out from my slides here is that the roads connect, which is really fun. Then Civ 5, they're kind of just like cut through the middle of a farm. Whatever. But here you can see that they really they wind through the cities around the pyramids. They kind of cut around the market district towards the pyramids once again. They don't really seem to be complete. They don't really connect up with everything. But you have that sort of like a plantation thing in the corner which is cut off, but clearly there's a road that cuts through it. And that gold tile clearly has a road that goes in any direction and connects up to the science tile. So, really interesting. I like the look of that. One thing I'd like to note that I don't seem to have made a slide for, actually, is that there are both palm trees and pine trees everywhere. And I'm not really sure what that means. Is that just sort of like a, pre-alpha, like, they're just kind of populating the world with trees? Are they different resources to provide different kinds of trees? I know that in Civ 5, a landmass would be designated as a continent, and that continent's trees would then look different depending. But, in this, they're just kind of throwing them around, very different, very, very different types of trees. So I'm curious what that means. Alright, so here we are on our second slide, this time of Japan, which is a little bit more obvious with the samurai around, but also, once again, they still share the white and red color scheme of the previous game. One thing I'd like to point out at this point is that we have no UI, so we don't know how these colors are going to manifest other than these borders, but these borders look really nice, and I'd like to point out that on the water, the borders actually start shimmering with the water, while on land they maintain a solid feel. But let's jump right into it, and we have right off the bat our first city, which is obviously the Asian city set, which looks much different than from the suspected European and the African unit building set that we saw earlier. And what I would like to point out with this is that they're also very clearly in a future era. That in the previous picture we had swordsmen and archers. And this time we have, samurai, which are more advanced, I'd say, and crossbows. So it's possible that the city is not only of a different tile set, but of a different era entirely. You can also tell from the ships in the background, and just about everything else, really. But here again, we have that gold tile, and this is what really throws me off. So you can build in these district tiles. We know this, but the blue tile doesn't change between the shots. It doesn't seem to be, at least. But this one, it gets like a little, like a tower of sorts. Some sort of Asian-looking tower. But then if you look next to it, there's another one of the same tile, but it only has that little, columnic ring to it. It doesn't have that gold building, doesn't have the tower either, so I don't know, like, I have a hard time figuring out what these things are. Once again, if you guys have an idea, let me know, but it's either religious or cultural. I'm having a hard time deciding which one it is. But it's interesting to see that you can build multiples of the same district in one city, and that they can obviously provide different or more bonuses of sorts the more you add to them, I guess. I'm having a really hard time with these. Maybe having a more hard time than I should be. I don't know. But here we got what seems to be an Asian tile set village for the Japanese Civ. It looks, if you compare it back to the one that I saw that I called a market in the previous slide, it looks a bit more real, bit less, like, there's no color to it. Like, it doesn't necessarily look like it's like a special color-coded, like, iconic area. It looks more just kind of like a regular old village, which is interesting. But what is also interesting is that it might be another city, a smaller city maybe, because they both have monuments in them. So either you can build buildings within the core city and have like a suburb that also can get some of the same buildings, which is interesting, or this is simply a smaller city that was recently founded, and I'll point out some other reasons for why that's possible later. But right now, I'm just going to focus back onto the units, we'll just stick on kind of what's in this slide alone. So we're here with the samurai. Now the samurai are a unique unit, that's confirmed. They aren't just the Japanese look and feel to a swordsman unit, they're in fact have the unique samurai unit, and they look pretty great. And if you notice, like, yeah, they're a lot bigger, there's fewer of them, each one has a very unique thing, they're very bright red, you know, like, they're really trying to get these guys to stick out more. And of course we have up here the archers, which I assume are following some sort of Asian tile set, but I really can't figure it out for myself. But then you have these boats, two different kinds of boats on this one. Once again, they're more advanced. This screenshot's clearly in a later era, I'd say. But they definitely don't look anything Asian-like. They have a very sort of 16 to 1800s feel of European ships. Unless somebody else sees a sort of Asian influence on them, that's kind of what I'm seeing. So once again, maybe, you know, it's just not in the game yet. You know, they really only just announced it, and there's only 3 screenshots to go off of. But they did say they're trying to get as much in there as possible. So who knows? So, we have obviously then the Colossus here, which you could very clearly see of sorts. So it doesn't look like the Colossus of Rhodes. It's standing on one platform. So I'm not really sure what that is. I mean, it could be the Colossus, but it's not strictly the Colossus, as it's always been depicted in classical art. So maybe they just decided to go for the more practical, no, you couldn't actually build a statue like that, so they have it just straight up, who knows. And going on to more wonders, we have what looks to be the Oracle of sorts. I don't think this is another tile, I think this is simply another wonder, which I haven't really mentioned. Wonders are clearly built out in the world. It's much more of a Beyond Earth type thing, that, like, it's much more about what's out on the map and kind of tiles and building your wonders, at least, you know, Beyond Earth, the victory wonders, out in places. People can really see them. They really take up space. They really seem like wonders now, which is kind of cool. But here we have some priests of sort. I imagine they have some sort of Asian-y flair to them. Does this mean that religion's back in the game? If we go back to those Golds buildings, if they're really like a religious kind of faith building, then maybe we'll actually just get religion in the initial release, which would be kind of great, instead of having to wait for an expansion for religion again, like every single Sims game does. But other than that, we got some pigs up in a marsh, and then we get this weird red stuff. I don't know what the red stuff is. I don't know. They don't look like berries or something, unless it's just kind of like a low-res thing in the background or something. But if anybody has any idea what that is, like, let me know, because that's been bugging me, I can't figure that out. And, so, this is my predicament with that village, is that... So this village is clearly about 4 tiles away. It's the 5th tile away from the city. Now... if we look at the previous screenshot, the city's borders only go 4 tiles away and stop in either direction. And it doesn't go any further beyond that. It sort of thins out towards the end. But then if you go back to the screenshot from this slide, you see that it goes 4 tiles, meets to another tile, and then expands off into more directions. So they could either be a sort of a village tile that expands your borders, that they increase the influence of one city, or it's simply a smaller city. It's hard to tell. It could be either way, and I'm kind of really interested to see what these things are. And if we just go straight to the next slide then, once again we have the same sort of thing, that the little village tile up there, and I'll give you a clearer shot after this, it's about 4 tiles away from the main city. And then there is clearly so much more border. Those borders go across those mountains. And it seems to be within about 4 tiles of this thing, otherwise kind of where they go. So it's interesting because we're not seeing 2 large cities. We're seeing a large city and then a smaller city, which is interesting because I'm leaning towards, like, these are sort of a border expanding kind of suburb to the main city, which would be fun if there's actually like a separate suburb list of if you ever kind of make a Civ mod, you kind of take like the biggest cities in the Civ, but maybe like you'll have 20 or 40 cities like below 10,000 people that just kind of become the kind of suburbs of those cities. That'd be kind of fun, but who knows. And now straight on to the third and final screenshot that's been released as of today, which is May 18th, 2016. So this is just the actual plain screenshot, which I was showing you covered before, with the same sort of level of Asian city, with some buildings kind of spreading off of it towards the coast. But I'd like to point out is the dock, which we have a really good picture of here. That in the other slides they were there, but I think the dock might also be simply like another tile. Like, it doesn't necessarily isn't there because there's a city here, but simply like they built a dock on the coast there for ships or something. But since we're focusing on the coast here, I'd like to point out, first off, there's crabs, which they could be a luxury resource, or they could be a food source. But crabs were a luxury in Civ 5, so just something interesting to point out. And there's also some sort of coral here next to the lighthouse, maybe some sort of off-coast minerals. It's hard to tell. Maybe pearls, but might once again be a sort of a luxury resource to be had on the coast. Maybe to increase your vampire's happiness. But speaking of vampire's happiness, we got an entertainment center here of sorts, which it's fun. It's purple, which seems to be the color designated to purple. Or designated entertainment, I'd say. And what I really like in here is that there is a dinosaur. And you said this guy. It's got little dinosaur bones, and some next to it too. And we haven't seen one of these tiles or districts, as they call them, I believe, not on dinosaur bones. So I'm curious, is that just kind of like, oh, they have a museum in here? Or is there maybe like a little like a paleontology kind of thing? Maybe like the archaeology in the last game that you like dig up bones for science and culture, which would be kind of fun to kind of reconcile both science and culture that way. Who knows? I know that Beyond Earth had a lot of artifact recovery. Maybe they're kind of going to do something like that, like we saw those gold tiles expanding, and there is a gold tile in the corner here. I'm not going to show it, but there is another one. Then maybe you can expand this with a museum or, say, artifacts that you might find on the map. So, we go up here, we have more units. Obviously, we covered the samurai earlier. We got some pikemen, some horsemen. They did say that with the pikemen specifically, the shape of their spearheads, or pike heads, or blades, whatever we're going to call them, are going to kind of designate kind of where they're from. But they're here, and if you notice, they are actually next to what they are referring to as a war camp. I don't know what a war camp is. I don't know if you recruit units out of them. Are they a defensive structure? Are they a little bit of both? And maybe you can recruit units in a city and war camps, but maybe war camps have a bonus of like training them better or giving a defensive bonus. If you notice, that war camp is also along the river next to the bridge. So maybe there's a bigger advantage to defending on bridges. That maybe there's a larger penalty against fighting across rivers that would kind of force people there. Maybe it's just there because they put it there. Who knows? But if you go through to the next slide, we have a lumberyard, which is interesting because back in the first slide there was a bunch of pine trees of sorts and sort of plantation thing. I thought it was a lumberyard, but this is clearly a lumberyard. It's orange, which would probably designate production then. And not much to say. Probably going to be able to boost the production of a city. Maybe increase your ability to make structures or something. And here we got copper, it looks like. We got both a mine and a uncollected resource up in the corner there. Once again, mines, probably production. They don't really show the same kind of like colorful, iconic look that, say, the lumber mill does. That clearly shows this is orange, this is production. But mines, not sure if they're a district yet or not. And then finally here we got what looks to be a trading post. And this is really throwing me off because this looks very different from the trading post in the Egyptian slide that I referred to. So unless it's a different era one or something, what does that mean? But that does debunk the idea that the kind of villages are trading economic things, because this is very clearly a very different looking tile from the one up in the corner there. So this is probably one meant for money, and the other one's probably meant for expansion, maybe more population. Maybe there's a limit to population in a city, so you kind of build sub-cities around them to do it. I don't know. And finally, there are a lot of things that we've gotten outside the screenshots as well. They've spoken about kind of a more active tech tree, that instead of just simply researching what you need when you want it, if you build a lot more boats, you're going to be improving your rate of naval research, because your civilization, your people like ships, they are very much used to boats. They'll be much more focused on creating boat technology. Whereas if you, say, build a lot of farming and sort of like, land improvements, maybe you'll get improvements on things that increase your farming output and your construction rates. Or if you're building a bunch of soldiers, your military research will get a bonus, which I think is really cool. I think it really helps them kind of make it more involved. Like, I believe you can research in Civ 5 63 techs without discovering sailing. That your people, I believe, can get railroads without ever knowing how to make a boat. And it's a little weird, but I think this is kind of a little bit more of a fun way to do it. That is kind of, your people are good at what you want. They're good at what you do, which I really respect. Other things to note is that they're kind of bringing partial stacking military units back. That they seem to be building kind of a support unit set that you can kind of have a group of, say, riflemen supported by an anti-tank gun. And that kind of becomes a stronger unit that is more versatile between them. Or, say you have 3 units of samurai, you can combine them to 1 large unit of samurai, which doesn't deal as much damage as, say, 3 units of samurai. By the way, I believe you couldn't actually do 3 samurai. I believe that these don't come until, the World War I era, but say you have 3 units of samurai, they might do the damage of 2.5 samurai, but they can take so much more damage before dying, that they're much more tankier, if not a little bit weaker, but also easier to manage. Which is also interesting because you can actually stack civilian units onto military units, so that you don't have to worry about your workers getting kidnapped by barbarians all the time when they're building a road between your cities. Then you have the art, which it looks great. I mean, just look at that water and the land. A lot of people, their first reactions were like, it's cartoony. But it's just so readable. You can see everything so clearly, and it looks so nice. Those mountains looks great. The land just looks so bright and colorful that I like the very kind of realistic art deco look of Civ 5. I love it. I thought it was a really cool aesthetic, but you know what? I'm glad that they're taking the initiative to change it, because it just looks great, and I think it'll be a much more readable game. Much easier to kind of look at a glance and know what's going on. And because even me, who follows Civ Battle Royale and has played hundreds of hours of Civ 5, it's hard to tell things sometimes. You really have to kind of squint at the map. You're like, oh, that's what's going on here. But I think they're really going for a much more of a readable, very visual, very identifiable silhouette type thing, kind of like Team Fortress 2 did. That everything has a very clear look. You could never mistake it for anything else, and I really respect that of them. So that's just about everything I have to say about the trailer and the release information, and about just about everything we know about Civ 6 right now. Thank you guys for watching, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. I do plan on making more of these things. But please, let me know what you think about this. Are you excited for Civ 6? Do you think, wow, Drazule, you're completely wrong at what you said, or wow, I like what you said? Hopefully the latter, but, please, if you have anything against me, well, any constructive to say against me, please say it. So, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I've been Drazule, and I will see you guys on my next breakdown.